Right, ladies and gentlemen, I've got my next guest in front of me, Gary McQueen. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast and giving up some of your time. I know you're a very, very busy man these days, Gary. So let's get right into it. I know last week you had a really busy week, so if you wouldn't mind sharing what was going on there.
Yeah. So as COVID came about, I managed to secure a Epic Mega Grant from Epic Games for a digital fashion show that I had planned anyway. Due to the situation with COVID, everything going digital, and that being advanced so much, and Epic Games also wanting to branch out into different industries, and the fashion industry being one of it. Me having that knowledge of obviously the fashion industry, and also the knowledge of that digital space, I was a perfect candidate. So yeah, I've been working on that since COVID started for 6 months or so, well, over 6 months, and I've just launched a digital show a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been really busy during COVID.
Yeah, good stuff. We were just talking off air, Gary, about the last year, COVID-19, and as you quite rightly pointed out, there is some great opportunities. And what I love about, part of my mission with the podcast is to speak to go-getters. They are predominantly entrepreneurs. I've been interviewing a lot of artists recently because obviously I'm a founder of a big art brand called Woodbury House, which is based in Soho. So it only made sense for me to interview artists. I've actually interviewed people in fashion, chefs, footballers, boxers, music artists, you name it. And one thing I love always about entrepreneurs is if you really think about it, and I've seen this time and time again on social media, that going into business on your own is actually only in some ways, a little bit stupid because the odds are stacked against you. But entrepreneurs always seem to find the way, if they persevere, hard work, dedication, and they're optimists with a great plan, find a way to push through that barrier.
It's part of it, you know what I mean?
Exactly. And
creative, it's finding solutions. I mean, you're always a problem solver.
Yeah.
With your artwork, finding, how to adapt things. With me, it's adapting, knowing how to adapt. In this case, 3D technology,
Yeah.
with artwork and fashion. So yeah, I really get that.
And what I was going to get to is, a lot of people that you speak to, mainstream media, even maybe the older generation who are cut from a slightly different cloth, they might be a little bit pessimistic towards the whole corona thing. Not just the virus itself, but what it's done, the ripple effect, into different sectors and different businesses. But it's quite a breath of fresh air when I speak to someone where they say, actually there's opportunity. So your take on it, Gary, what are the opportunities that have come off the back end of lockdown and also coronavirus?
Well, it's that, not me, but everybody's been pushed into this kind of having to sort of communicate over Zoom, doing everything digitally. That old bricks and mortar sort of idea is, is kind of falling apart a bit, So, there's really opens up this kind of market for online interaction, digital platforms, going in like the shopping experience in terms of the fashion industry. People couldn't get that, they couldn't go into the store. And what I've managed to do with my show is also include a virtual showroom, just to keep that kind of experience alive virtually. You can go in and, it's all part of an experience when you go shopping. It's that world and that brand that you step into, which makes that experience special,
Yeah.
And I've managed to translate that with my virtual showroom as well.
Yeah.
My brand.
Yeah.
So, that's one aspect of that. But yeah, I think it's really like the younger generation that are really going to catch on to this kind of thing. That, markets, like my son plays Fortnite and all that online gaming, and understands the concept of skins, which are essentially outfits that you buy for your avatars for the games.
Yeah.
And I think they're really the generation that's really going to sort of embrace it going forward. as this goes into like more mainstream, the concept of wearing like digital clothes, which is what I've essentially produced for my show, you know. And
Yeah.
that would also sort of lead into avatars and self-identifying and all that stuff, you know, which is what they do at the moment with gaming.
Yeah.
That I think will become more mainstream eventually for virtual events and stuff.
Yeah. So, Gary, like, obviously you're a businessman and also an entrepreneur, but how would you identify yourself if you were to go further than that? Would you say you're, let's say, a fashion designer, or would you say you're an artist? How would you title yourself?
Well, I always call myself an artist. So, I mean, I come from quite a diverse background of knowledge from different disciplines within the design industry. I've always been artistic from a young age. You know, I was introduced by my uncle from to film and fashion, I guess, as well, when he used to babysit and draw, you know, fashion pieces. We used to watch the horror films together and all that stuff, which ignited my imagination from a young age. So I used to draw as well and create my own characters. But I studied graphic design, and I never really saw myself as a graphic designer. Always as a storyteller. I know I was always very artistic and would create my own worlds in some way. But you know, just that straight cut graphic design wasn't really for me.
Yeah.
But I did start in publishing, you know, as a junior, where I learned a lot of the software and technical aspects involved in creating high quality artwork, you know, resolution and all that stuff, print quality. So I did that for 3 years when I graduated from my graphic design course. And when that went to liquidation, I found myself out of work. And that's when my uncle stepped in and he had this position that opened on Alexander McQueen, the menswear line. And I didn't know anything about fashion, you know. But what I am good at, and what you touched on earlier, is that sort of improvisation and, you know, being able to adapt to situations as an artist, you know, and problem solving. I'm really good at that sort of thing. So I knew how to translate my artistic skills quite quickly onto the pattern pieces of the garments, you know,
Yeah.
and how that sort of translates. And then it was just a matter of really sort of learning all those, just like the language within the fashion industry, you know, how things can be adapted in different ways and produced in different ways. Like, so it could be printed or it could be woven, like an artwork could be woven into the fabric, or it could be like embroidered. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I learned quite quickly, you know, and within a year I had quite a good knowledge about what I was doing. And I stayed at Alexander McQueen for 7 years. So that's like 14 different shows I worked on. And then when he passed away, you know, I stayed for the further 2 years after he passed away, and then decided to leave and start my own brand. And as I was doing that, I actually got a job as a fitting photographer. So I was based between Italy and Berlin, traveling constantly there, where I was taking like studio photography pictures of all the looks during the fittings. So you have 3 fittings leading up to a show, which start usually on like the most basic silhouettes just cut out of, you know, rough
Yeah.
cloth to get like an idea of the shape. And then you get like a sample back, that's another fitting, and then you have like the final pieces, which is the first fitting. And, you know, I'm self-taught in a lot of things, so I had to YouTube, had to use studio lighting, you know, and there's lots of things involved in that as well, you know. There's like the temperature of the light can affect the colour of the clothes, you know. It could be anything, you know. But, you know, I've got quite a vast knowledge of different skills that apply, that I brought forward now, you know, for my own brand, that I can apply in different ways. You know, I'm pretty much a one-man band. Only recently, when I got this epic grant, I could employ like an assistant and
Yeah.
pack cutters to help me create the clothes, the patterns of the clothes. You know, and some other companies that I've been working with as well to bring together, like a Dutch company called Myota Media as well, who actually helped me bring it all into Unreal Engine. You know, so there's the whole pipeline, and I'm just currently writing a paper and breaking it all down, because you take all this knowledge that I've got, you know, all this sort of technological knowledge that, you know, a lot of fashion designers don't have, and people in that digital space don't understand the fashion side of it either, and how these two come together. You know, I've kind of took for granted, and when you start putting it down on paper, you know, it's quite a complex process.
Yeah.
I guess that's my USP.
Yeah. Well, So you said a few things there, but the thing that stood out for me, which really resonated with me, is storytelling. And I think that's so important because I've told this story so many times that I got into the art market by chance, and it was this artist behind me, Richard Hamilton. If you were just to look at it, it's a black shadow on a canvas, and to someone that is brand new to it, that's all it is. But when you learn about the story, the history, the narrative, and what he stood for, it starts to shape your taste buds. And I think with fashion and art, with what you're doing, the crossover, the cross-pollination, it's exactly the same. And I think telling a narrative, a story, will help sell your products. But I think it goes beyond that. I think if you're going to...
involved as well, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think if you...
Well.
Yeah, look, I don't know your plans, Gary, but if you were to raise money from an angel, a VC, or some kind of investor into your company, I mean, yeah, they're going to look at your product and they're obviously going to look at you as a profile, but they're going to want to see a narrative, some kind of story, and that's what people buy into at the end of the day. Sometimes the product could be quite average, not saying yours is, but in some companies, but if the narrative is right and it's a compelling, exciting, powerful story, that's what people buy into, right?
Yeah, I mean, everything I do is based on storytelling. When I started my brand, it was scarves, but that particular scarf artwork, say, was always built on this deep storytelling where I grab different references and create new worlds for people to step into. And that's the thing that makes me excited, is creating these worlds that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
Going off the basis of that kind of childhood thing that I sort of adapted from Lee, love of storytelling, drawing my own little characters and stuff, create my own little worlds in that sense, and that's kind of come up to this kind of more sophisticated level of photo shoots, and most recently like a short film that I created, which was the show.
Yeah.
So that part is what excites me, and that's part of the selling point, of a product as well.
Yeah.
Is having that deep storytelling that people can step into that world, And for me, it's not always one thing as well. These can split off, Like one story could be like a photo shoot, like a scarf, and it could be like a sculpture or a piece of art. It's like a collective,
Yeah.
Around the story. It kind of branches off into different things. So I really like to create these nice little packages.
Yeah.
Like around the story.
Yeah.
Just for authenticity, I think.
Yeah. We're following a very similar path to you, because when we first started as a brand, 2014, we were, without even knowing it, an art distribution company. So we had external sales agents making the sales, and we were providing the product from the Richard Hamilton IP or archive. Now we do it all in-house, and we're essentially art dealers for the Hamilton IP. But as time has gone on, we've now set up a online e-commerce store. What we want to do is, offer lower end ticket items from, merchandise, collectibles to limited editions, but unique and special collaborations. So we're always going to stay in this street art sector to affiliates to Hamilton, but we want to do unique projects where we come together with an affiliate of Hamilton's and do, have the canvases, yes, for the advisory team where people build their portfolios, but from the lower end, have really, really cool, a run of 25 of these unique garments or whatever, and hopefully have a drop culture where you drop it and within minutes it's sold out. And that's what we want to get to. And I feel like the journey with you is, quite similar. Parallels there.
Yeah, I mean, especially with this show, that I've just created, there's so many elements to that, so many strings to that bow involved. You've got digital, and then the possibility of physical things on the back of that. But the digital side of it just branches off in so many different ways as well. The set itself built in Unreal Engine. I did a site visit to the Outernet last week, which is a new building. They're building outside of Tottenham Court Station, and the whole building is made up of TV screens. Interactive TV screens. We're talking like 4 stories high.
Okay.
And they use Unreal Engine environments within that space, so it wraps around the building internally and also externally. But that opens up a world of using like the set that I had in my show to a backdrop for a concert, music concert. Do you know what I mean? So it's all this kind of cross pollination, as you call it, of like music, film, art, fashion. You know, for me, I bring all these things together. You know, with this new medium.
Yeah.
So, and you know, I see that each look from that show as a piece of art in itself. That could be a collectible thing. You know, that could be within the NFT market. You know, who knows? People collecting for their virtual wardrobes. You know.
Yeah.
And then, you know, obviously we've got the physical collection that I'd like to bring off the back of it. The way that this particular collection was constructed is, you know, it's 50-50 men and women looks. It's also quite commercial when you break it down to the pieces that I've included in the show, even though it's all done in a very showy kind of way, built into this kind of world, you know, to sort of tell the story. But when you break the pieces down, they're quite wearable and commercial, you know,
yeah.
A lot of them. There are some, you know, show pieces that are a little bit more, you know, haute couture, as they call it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think I've made it quite a diverse collection, you know.
That's good. So, over your right-hand shoulder, I know it's, you know, you're in your, yeah. No, the first hand that you put up, not that one, the next one, the one with the pen in your hand. That one. So you've got we got connected through Fraser, a mutual friend of ours, and you've got this skull-like art piece, which I think is fantastic. And am I right in saying it's I can't remember, like 30,000 or something like that retail price from memory?
Yeah, I mean, they're 4 foot by 5 foot high, so they're really quite large, impressive pieces.
Yeah.
Sorry, the story behind that one. So that's the Benitez skull. I took part in the McQueen documentary, which was a film about my uncle. And the directors knew about the piece I did for the V&A, which was a Savage Beauty skull, which we'll probably get to in a minute as well. But they weren't something similar that kind of encapsulated my uncle's spirit in some way. I usually have these kind of visions in a way. You know, it's almost like an out-focus picture. I know what it is. I know the feeling of what it is, but I've got to then translate that physically into something tangible. So the Benitez, that image was actually that blurry image in my mind. So the way that was built was I 3D sculpted that, so 3D technology, you know, 3D digital sculpted, and then that was 3D printed as an actual sculpture, about 3 foot high. And then we filled it with real flowers, and I worked with a photographer on that called Dan Tobin-Smith, who took the final shot, and we did a time lapse of the real flowers dying to create the lenticular animation, you know, and that is built out of 10 frames of animation basically.
Right.
To create that. And the idea is, you know, you've got this life and death within one image, and that's the whole ethos behind the Benitez painting. So the skull framework itself, the gold framework on the skull is made out of like birds, butterflies and flowers, something that really represents my uncle. And then, you know, you've got the life of the flowers essentially dying within that as well.
Yeah.
So just life to death within one image, you know.
If you don't mind me saying, I mean, it is, you know, a very McQueen type look, you know, if that came out, if that came out in 2005, for example, you would say, yeah, that's an Alexander McQueen type, you know?
Yeah, that's like, there's a certain spirit that lives in me that lived in my uncle, you know?
Yeah.
And not that it's not like I've taken that from him. We both just happen to have that same similar spirit and that dark romance, you know, or way of translating that like the imagination in a certain way, you know, and it just happens to be very similar.
Yeah, it's really really cool.
Because that's a unique artwork, you know, that I created.
Yeah, it's really really cool. I like it a lot. When Fraser showed me, I was like, yeah, it's really sick. I could even see one of those in my house. So maybe something we can talk about later on. But look, so I interviewed a friend of mine back in the last year, a guy called Lewis Burton. You know, he used to be an ex-professional tennis player, model. He's now a business person, but he's also known in the media for going out with Caroline Flack. And as you well know, sadly, just over a year ago, she committed suicide. And I was the first person he come onto the podcast to speak about it. And you know, quite moving, you know, quite a tearful moment. And I really admire people and respect people, especially when they come out publicly to talk about it, because it's a bit like counselling in a way. When we're talking about it, you're getting it off your chest. Now, I know your uncle. Yeah, it's like, I know it's well over 10 years ago now, about 11 years ago, I think 2010. So just in case the audience don't know, you're the nephew of, your uncle was Lee Alexander McQueen, which was the founder of Alexander McQueen. And if anyone doesn't know, I mean, he sadly was fighting some demons and, you know, passed away, committed suicide in 2010. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Lee had complex personality anyway, you know. You could almost call it split personality.
Yeah.
Way. But he dealt with lots of different issues, you know, from a young age.
Yeah.
Which affected him ultimately by the end of it, you know. And
sorry, Gareth, just gone a little bit quiet down your end. Sorry, mate. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, cool. Alongside the pressures that come with what he was doing as well.
Yeah.
You know, and my nan also passed away a week before he committed suicide.
Yeah.
I know there were a few attempts leading up to that as well that we found out after, and we didn't really know about at the time as a family. Even though I worked with him, you know, and being his nephew, there was also this kind of line that I couldn't cross. You know, I might have seen him quite sort of out of it or whatever, you know, or something, but I didn't quite feel like I could really reach out to him in that aspect.
Yeah.
It was kind of part of the parcel of him as a person as well. He loved to party and, you know, and drugs played a part in it and all that stuff, you know. And you just think they know what they're doing in a way, you know.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to sort of infringe on that. And he would have brought me into the company if I was going to start doing that. You know, I was the only family member to be taken into that company. But that's only because he knew my skills. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, in hindsight, you wish you'd sort of reached out then, you know.
Yeah.
But hindsight, isn't it? And you can live in regrets. And what I try to do these days is just, you know, pay tribute with everything I do, like the work that I produce. I try to continue that spirit within my work, you know, create my own unique stories in my own way, taking it forward into like a digital movement, you know, which is something I think he'd really be into now, you know. He was really forward thinking himself in terms of technology, you know, using holograms within shows, robots and all sorts, you know, back then. But with the possibilities that he would have had these days, you know, he definitely would have been looking along the same lines as where I'm going in terms of the advancements in like AR and VR.
Yeah. So I obviously knew who or the brand Alexander McQueen many years ago, and it was only because of his death I end up watching and looking into him a bit more and watching the documentary, I think, on Netflix, and I didn't realize how much ahead of his time he was, and he was so bold with you know, with what he was trying to do. I mean, I remember in the documentary that the catwalk will come out and he would literally on the spot come up with an idea, like wrap cling film around one of the catwalk models, and she went out there and it captured the audience, it captured the media, and it was a big wow. And people,
last minute, like ingenuity, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it's just incredible, and so many people would have been afraid of taking their moves, but it seemed like he was fearless. You know, he would just do what the hell he wanted to do. You know.
Yeah, I think we work in a similar way. I'm never going to put myself on the same platform as my uncle, but you know, you get given this kind of these like messages. Do you know what I mean? Subconsciously as an artist, and it doesn't feel like you're in control of them sometimes. You know, it's like you're the receiver, and there's like a transmitter that gives you these ideas and things like that. And you know, I can imagine that he would have seen something last minute, and you know, it just come together, you know, and work.
Yeah.
like aesthetic, or whatever it was, you know. And yeah, and those kinds of moments can really sort of change history, you know.
Yeah. But seeing that for yourself, working alongside of him, you know, on the positive note, like where he was so bold and so ambitious and fearless, I mean, that must have really inspired you, because if you work with, you know, most people, even if they're in business for themselves, they're quite cautious, you know, and you have to be, because business, as we said before, is very, very difficult and most businesses fail. But he seemed like to have, you know, like a fuck it attitude. Let's go for it, you know. And I like that. I really, really admire people that had that attitude.
I think he was just so he was like absorbed into his world. Do you know what I mean? He knew exactly what his brand was about, what he was about, the stories he wanted to tell, and he just stayed true to that.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? And that came through in his work, and people connected with that as well. It was the time he was living in as well. You know, it was like Cool Britannia. You know, early '90s. You had Tracy Emin's and Damien Hirst coming up,
Mm.
and you know, it is timing sometimes as well with
Yeah,
these things.
yeah,
You know, to come back like I was thinking to you earlier. You know, art and movements are usually like a reflection of things that are happening in society. You
definitely,
know,
yeah,
and whatever Lee was doing at that time when he first came up was a reflection of all that. You know, that rawness. So yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it did definitely have that kind of way about him. You know, and people fed off that with him in the studio. You know, he was like central nervous system, and it's more than him just like saying do this and do that. It's like you feel it around him. There's
yeah,
an aura.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And you respond to that. There's like a certain feeling in the atmosphere, and yeah, everybody picked up on it.
Yeah, I mean, I fully resonate with that as well. I mean, when you get people on their game, you know, who are go getters and they've got this vision for the future and they've got ideas in their head, they have, as you perfectly put it, an aura, and people pick up on that aura, and magical things can happen off the back end of it. So, look, I know you touched on that. You know, I just want to finish it on this note because it's something I'm intrigued about, and this is not about, you know, anybody else, but, you know, by you, this podcast. But I'm just intrigued. So obviously, we're in 2021, and in the last few years, I think mental health has been highlighted a great deal, and I think rightly so. But hindsight again, it's a little bit too late. In some respect for certain people, going back to Lee, you know, drink, drugs and mental health, in some ways all those things were a blessing, because I don't think without those things he could have been who he was, and I don't think he would have created the best brand. Look, I work with artists and they're notorious for taking drink, drugs and having the ups and downs, and they produce some of their best works. But on the flip side, if it gets the better of them, it can literally be fatal. And clearly Lee McQueen was an example of that. So what's your take on the mental health side of things with the
Well,
art and fashion market?
I mean, being creative is, you know, I'm supporting the Mind charity as well with my show that I did, Fascinated Mind. And when you're a creative person, it's quite a lonely place to be. Do you know what I mean? That whole process of being withdrawn within that world, you know, where only you kind of exist in your mind, and it's quite isolating. So I can really relate to where Lee would come from that aspect, you know, because you know you can have people around you that you love and you really want to reach out to, but I suffer from it myself, and you're so withdrawn into that world that it becomes very isolating, you know.
Yeah,
And you know, I can imagine like I don't think Lee really needed the drugs, to be honest with you, because you know if you got imagination, it's really great imagination and creativity that Lee had. I can't see how he really needed those drugs on top of it anyway to enhance that. For me, probably, you know, I don't take drugs. Obviously, I've dabbled in a few in the past, but I don't need them for my creativity necessarily. So I don't think Lee would have necessarily needed the drugs. You know, I think that might have been something else that he was trying to deal with, and he used drugs, things like that as well.
mm,
And I think that can also start to destroy things the drugs eventually, you know. And you're always trying to chase that, you know. I think you just need stronger things, and it is like a rabbit hole. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to highlight mental health. There's obviously the COVID, which a lot of people. I think it's because I've been in that isolation for so long myself, as I said, as an
Yeah.
artist, that I was quite used to it when COVID come around. You know what I mean? I was quite used to like living the way that most people had to start to live when COVID happened. So all of a sudden, it felt like I was in a sort of stronger position where I could kind of guide people a bit, you know, and
Yeah.
felt stronger for once
Yeah.
in that sense. And you know, that's why I felt it was like really important to sort of support my charity anyway when I did this, and let people step away from the confinements of their walls and into this immersive world, you know,
Yeah.
for 10 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, look, supporting any charity, but especially I think it's, it's on point right now to be supporting anything to do with mental health, anxiety, suicides. I mean, look, in the last year, I mean, the media has done a great job, highlighting all the deaths or supposed deaths anyway from COVID. But what about all these people losing their jobs, losing their homes, and losing their careers and jumping off buildings because they feel like the world's against them? They're not really doing a great job there, and I think it's people like you, Gary, that highlight these things and puts that back into perspective and shows that there is other issues out there beyond COVID.
Well, exactly. I mean, it is. I mean, the mental health side of things has really got to, definitely outweigh, what the media has said in terms of the death tolls and things like that. So, I mean, because I can't imagine there isn't one person on the planet that it didn't affect mentally,
Yeah,
and large proportion of those really start to struggle in lots of different ways. Financial things can start to take a turmoil, and that can develop into sort of depression, isolation, fear, all these things. Everybody would have definitely been affected, meant like in a mental health kind of way, from one of these things, during that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Gary, I would again just want to ask you one more sort of direct question, and it's could be quite a hard one, or might have answered it a few times. I asked a very similar. What colour are your pants? Yeah, I asked a very very similar question to Lewis when he was talking about Caroline. Do you remember the moment, and how was you feeling when you first heard about your uncle Lee passing away, committing suicide? What was that feeling like?
Just disbelief, really. I mean, I come into work because leading up to that day, the week before, obviously my nan had passed away, and I was working on the gravestone with Lee personally for my nan, which was this angel that I created. So I was just showing Lee like the initial sketches and things like that. And then the day before it happened, he said, "Oh, like he finally signed it off. He was happy with the design." And he said, "I'm going to leave this up to you to do," sort of thing. And he didn't say why or anything like that. I just thought, "Oh, okay." So he said he left it up to me to like source the stonemason and all that stuff, the sculptor who was going to make it. And then the next day when I come in, I found out what had happened. It was just total disbelief and shock. I was taken into the office by the CEO. Lee was creative director and has a CEO there as well. And he just sat me down and just said Lee was dead. And when you hear those words, you just don't register it. Do you know what I mean? You just don't do anything. Like, just
Yeah,
total shock. And then I just had to go home, and then I ended up taking quite a long leave from work, maybe a month or two, I think. And it kind of sparked, like from there, I think, I started having my own like issues as well, like mental health myself, and it developed into OCD and all kinds of things, and eventually it got too much, and I did leave the brand, and I did have my own things that I wanted to do, but I needed to take time off as well because I was there's a lot going on, you know. I like my son was born around the same time as
Right.
well, and you know, it's just all responsibility and all that stuff can really sort of just add up alongside trauma, you know, and can really put you over the top. So
I was going to ask, losing not only a family member, but let's have it right. You know, someone that was inspiring you, someone that was a bit of a mentor, probably, and someone that was, even in some ways, a business affiliate.
yeah.
What is the kind of advice? You know, I've lost people in my life, but I don't think as close as probably yourself. Obviously, my nan, but she was older and she was nearly approaching 100, so you kind of expect it. But with someone like Lee, you're not. So, what's the kind of advice that you could share with people, or what kind of like things did you do to get yourself through that tough time?
No easy way of saying it, really. It's just time. Do you know what I mean? Like I've been through like the darkest times, and somehow you can't see the light. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes I go stay still, you know, but it's just you know, you just got to carry on. The best thing to do is go to sleep and wake up the next day, and it is usually a better day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I've been near the mark of, you know, committing suicide myself. So I've contemplated it quite a few times, you know, due to various things, but I've just, you know, made it through to the next day, you know, and sometimes you have things that keep you motivated to be alive and carry on. You know, I've had my kids, you've got to look at the little things in life, you know, that you have got, and just sort of appreciate them, you know, and not dwell on some of these darker times and thoughts that come into your head. You know, it's really hard to tell somebody that when they're in that moment, because I've been there so many times myself. But, you know, there is always a light around the corner, you know. You know, unexpectedly I got this epic grant which turned things around for me as well, you know. So these miracles do happen, these small miracles, and they keep you going.
Yeah. Like again, I would say I've not really been through. I mean, everyone feels depression, everyone feels fear, everyone feels anxiety. But on the flip side, everyone feels optimistic sometimes, happy, cheerful. And I think the difference is some people either, you know, sometimes they can, you know, really live in one of the feelings for far too long, and then there's always going to be a backlash to it. And my example, my metaphor is a bit like, you know, your emotions are a bit like the ocean. You know, sometimes it's going to be chaotic. It's going to be big waves. It's going to be crashes. It's going to be, you know, very, very uncertain. And then other times it's going to be completely smooth. And
Extreme.
yeah.
With life bubbles washing away.
Yeah, and nothing lasts forever. Not the good times and not the bad times. And if you're going through a bad time, just know it's going to pass. And I know it's quite easy for someone to say, but it really will pass. Whether that's a few hours, days, weeks, months, years, it eventually has to pass. And
it does. There is really this thing in the universe, do you know what I mean? I believe in like universal power and stuff like that.
the law of attraction. Yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff. And there is always a reason for bad things happening. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, they say like one door closes and another one opens. And that's
Of course.
so true. You've got to believe in the system, you know. I've heard, you know, before we actually get here on Earth, you know, we're given like, a list of things that's going to happen in our life and we sign it because, you know, it's part of our life lessons and it's all for the better.
Yeah.
And it is part of going through those hardships and learning, you know, that propels us.
I think that's a great attitude and a great way of looking at it. So on a bit more of a like, you know, let's say your journey now. So I asked, this next question is quite similar to a question I asked a boxer, professional boxer. I don't know if you're into your boxing. I interviewed two of the Eubanks, so not Chris Eubank, but his brother Seb, who's a boxer and an MMA fighter. But then someone else I know a little bit more better than Seb is Harlem, who is the cousin. Harlem Eubank, because he fights down my boxing gym. And I said, with your surname, Eubank, I mean, even if you're not a fanatic of, you know, boxing fanatic, you could ask probably a granny and say, do you know who Chris Eubank is? And they're going to go, yeah, of course. You know, they're more than a boxer. They're like a brand and iconic name. Yeah. Now, McQueen, most people, if you said that word, especially in London here, I mean, if I said Alexander McQueen, tell me about that brand, they're going to say something about it. So the question is, having that surname, I see benefits to it, but do you feel there's pressure? Like you have to live up to certain expectations, or don't you really think about that? You are Gary McQueen and that's who you are.
Yeah, I think that's going back to like that point you made about my uncle being, like fuck what everyone else says, I'm going to do what I want. It's more about me having my strong vision of what I'm doing,
Yeah.
whatever I'm trying to create, and just working towards that. And then people pick up on that, I guess, as well. And like my work, I guess, some people do, some people don't, but majority of people feel that, they pick up on that feeling what you're trying to project, like go back to the show that I just created because it's so amazing. But you're giving the people that world to step into, and all the kind of that feeling you're trying to translate, they just dig it. Do you know what I mean? They get into it, and
Yeah.
it is more of a feeling, that they pick up on themselves. So, when it comes to the name, people recognise the name, and it does help in certain aspects. There, that's why I'm scared to call myself a fashion designer at this point. So I mean, this is my first collection anyway. So there isn't that resemblance with my uncle as such. It's more about the art of storytelling that that's most got the most resemblance, if you like.
Yeah.
With my uncle.
Yeah.
It's the feeling of what I do,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And my uncle could have done the same. He could have gone into anything. He could have gone into like interior design or filmmaking or anything, and he would have projected that feeling that you got from his shows or his clothes into any other kind of aesthetic,
Yeah. So, Gary, like when I first started my podcast, I really wanted to. I was trying to fill a void, and what that void was is when I was younger, I was. I'm going to say it really bluntly, shit at school, like terrible. I never bunked off of school. I never took time off and faked I was ill and stuff. But from the moment I was there to the moment I left, didn't resonate with it. I felt like it was a big waste of time in some respects. I know it's not, but that's how I felt at the time. And
we had bigger ideas.
yeah, I mean, I just wasn't compatible with school. I mean, doing my algebra and doing geography and doing RE, I was like, what am I doing? Like, how am I going to take this? How am I going to take this into like the real world? But anyway, you're kind of forced to do it, and it is what it is. And back then, there was no social media. There was definitely no podcast. And now looking back, had there been a podcast, listening to great conversations like this, it might have sparked an idea and gave me some inspiration. So when I interview people like yourself, go-getters, entrepreneurs, creative people, I like to try and pull out some gems. So if a young girl or young boy is listening to this, they go, oh, that really resonates with me. Yeah. So what advice would you give from, number one, a creativity, artistic point of view, like how to stimulate that, or, what are the kind of things to do? And as an entrepreneur, business person, some of the fundamentals there. So you got two things. You got one hat, which is creativity, and one is the business.
I find it hard to balance the two, to be honest with you. I'm not the best business person either, really. What I've got is great creative vision of how something can relate in a certain market and things like that. It's just the finer details of business I'm not very good at.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? But, people ask me this question a lot, and I never feel like I'm the right sort of role model, really. All I can do is sort of speak from my own point of view, and, I'd love to inspire a younger generation, but I think it's about looking at, how you can apply yourself to things that you didn't really expect that those skills would apply to in life,
Yeah.
Like myself being from graphic design and then falling into fashion, it's opened up different possibilities. So, I think they should just really stay true to, this is going to become a cliche now. Stay true to your beliefs. Do you know what I mean? Stuff that inspires you, and try to adapt in different ways. But you don't have to be put in a box. Do you know what I mean? As well, you can do anything you want. And I've kind of proven that I'm not. I'm really an outsider within the fashion world, but I don't look at fashion to, I don't look at what other people in fashion are doing. I just use fashion in my own way.
Yeah.
I use it for my own art storytelling. For me, it becomes like a medium. I dress, like this photo shoot on this side here.
Yeah.
I created the garment only to create the story, the photo shoot, really.
Yeah.
I don't sell them. Do you know what I mean? Not yet.
Yeah.
But for me, it's about creating costumes, about embodying the spirit of that photo shoot, creating characters.
Yeah.
So you've just got to learn to adapt what you love doing and don't let other people dictate how you use it. Do you know what I mean? As you go through life, you can find your own way and lead the way eventually.
Yeah, that's good advice, mate. Really good advice. So, I don't know how old you are, Gary, but obviously,
25?
I was going to say that.
Yeah, I'm 40.
All right. Look, listen. As far as being a business person, and if I would say anything below like 40 and below is still relatively a pup in the business game. So you've got a long way, long time ahead of you, and there's so much to achieve. So tell me about your vision over the next 5, 10, 15 years. I know you said you're into law of attraction, you're into positive energies, you're into, a higher belief system almost. What are your plans?
For me, it's about inclusivity, like I just touched on, not being an outsider within the fashion world myself. It's really... I have really been on this journey alone. Do you know what I mean? When I've been building my brand for 5 years. So I guess it's, I want to create more of a movement where you can invite people who don't really realise that they could come into that world and use things in that way and create like a creative hub eventually.
Yeah.
Maybe some kind of academy where creatives you can nurture that raw talent. Do you know what I mean? And give people like a path the same way that I was given. I mean, that's the North Star for me at this point. Everything along that way is obviously business ventures that split off from everything that I do. But for me, creating some kind of community-driven hub, I guess, would be like the main goal, So that becomes more of a movement, or my brand becomes like a symbol in some kind of way of hope. You know what I mean? And community and collaboration.
Beautiful.
That's something that's important.
Good stuff. And are you? I know this is going to be a bit of a rhetorical question, but you're a big believer on setting goals and benchmarks and certain visions and standards for yourself over the next coming years. I mean, have you got like 5 years? This is where I want to be, and 10 years I want to sell the company, or in 10 years I want to get an investor. Anything like that?
I'm not that structured at the moment, but I'm working on it. But yeah, everything's feeling based. Yeah, that's my problem. It's because everything's feeling based. You feel where you want to go in a way, but it is getting that kind of more of a structured. Well, especially when it comes to business, obviously, is having that more of a structured course. For these type projections and things like that. But I am in talks with some people at the moment who can help me do that. So
cool. Gary, it's really been a good talk. Where can people find you, mate, if they want to follow you?
If they want to watch the show and see some of my work and some of my products, they can go to GaryJamesMcQueen.com, and that's where they'll find most of my stuff. Or on Instagram, I almost use that like a portfolio, which is Gary James McQueen Official on Instagram. They're probably the most, best places.
Perfect. All right, good stuff. And if people want to, end up buying some of your artwork or some of your garms, that's definitely a place they can hit you up on, yeah?
Yeah, through my website, they can send me an email through there as well.
Cool. Gary, many years ago when I first got into business for myself, I'm a salesperson, and I done, public speaking and leading sales teams. And in some ways it's a bit like leading an army, into battle. You have to rev people up, and you have to make sure that if they're having down days, you have to, lift their spirit up. And I come up with a saying, which is a bit of a catchphrase, which goes like this: be happy, never content. Now, I've got my own take on it. I always ask my guests, what does be happy, never content mean to Gary McQueen?
means you can always do better, can't you? On the next project, for me, usually, it's about pushing things forward and evolving. By the sounds of it.
That's it, mate. All right, perfect. Well, look, thank you for your time. I'm going to keep following your journey, mate. I'd really like them skulls, so let's talk about that in the future. Obviously, there should be some projects that we could work on together as well, no doubt. I really, really appreciate all the stories, all the feedback, and everything that you shared with us today. I think it's been very compelling, and it's been a great insight. And this podcast is going to come out on YouTube as well as on the podcast Apple Store in the next few weeks. So anyone listening to this, please share it, please comment, and give us a review. And always remember to be happy, never content. Thanks
a lot.
Thanks, Gary, and I'll stay in communication with you, mate. Cheers.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks.
Top man. Cheers. Bye.